I wondered if we could start with you describing what you do.
I'm a developmental psychopathologist. That was a term created by Dante Cicchetti at the time that both of us were coming out of our PhD work and beginning our careers. He began as a clinical psychologist, I as a developmental psychologist, and this term, developmental psychopathologist, really fits what I do. I want to bridge the gap between the best science and applications in treatment of people with psychological disorders, people with child protection issues, and people in forensics, in criminality.
Yep. In your work with developing the DMM is what brings everyone here today. And so I wondered if you could just give a little bit of an overview of what the DMM is.
The DMM is an organized structure of the best information that other people have found, the best ideas and other theories, the best empirical findings, the best knowledge we have for treatment. I don't want to claim that I created the DMM. I only put together other people's ideas in a, hopefully, logical and coherent manner. For me, the problem was different disciplines, different theories peered at human beings through the lens of what they liked best. But they didn't seem to understand that humans are a unified whole. I'd like our theory to be as unified as the humans we're talking about. Only that.
And I'm interested in how you came to pull all of those theories together. I wonder if we could start by talking about what made you first want to do this type of work.
This type of work has changed. It's not the type of work I was doing at the beginning. At the very beginning, my motivations were civil rights changes in the United States in the late 1960s. I wanted to see what we now call African Americans, or Blacks with a capital B. I wanted to see that group of people have the same kind of opportunities that my very white, very middle-class family had given me. So I began by teaching school in a segregated school in the last year that this school would exist as a non-integrated school. So I went from there to wanting a degree in education that would help me to better teach these children. I was told, get a degree in mental retardation. That will tell you where the thinking was. So I did. I got a degree in mental retardation. I taught special education for a number of years. Then I moved down to teaching mothers, working with mothers whose children were thought to be at risk for developmental delay. And that brought me into child abuse and neglect, and then.
What made you want to work in that field, the latter?
You know, going forward, I can tell you about each decision that was made as I had an opportunity and I either took the easiest route or I did something that was interesting, but I never, ever could have predicted where I was going. Looking back it all makes sense. And the story I would tell looking back is different from the story I would have told if every year I gave you a calendar update as I was doing it. It's quite different looking back. Looking back, I came from a family where there was a great deal of suffering. And I think intuitively and without any intention, in fact, intention to the opposite, I slowly gravitated back to people who had lived lives that I understood from my own experience of a very troubled life. I actively did not want to do anything like it was in my family. And I was in my mid-40s when I went, bing, you're doing what you learned at home. So it's something in helping others, but also in solving some issues for myself.
Is there any of that that you would feel able to share?
I don't know what would be interesting other than possibly, well, maybe two things. When I was 16, which is the summer before the last year of high school, I decided that the way I had lived my life up to now was not working, that one of the biggest problems was a boyfriend that I had had for 5 years, 12 to 16. And I thought, if I wanted to have a different adulthood than I had childhood, I needed to move out of that relationship. And I had 1 year of high school left in which to learn all the things that my peers had been learning about getting along with each other that I hadn't learned because I was buried in this close relationship. And I decided to break it off, to advance into the last year of high school, knowing I was going to be awkward, that I didn't have friends, that I would have to learn rapidly what everybody else had learned, and I would really stick out as the one who didn't know how to do it. But then I would go to college, and I would go far enough away that nobody would know my history. I would come with my newly earned skills, and life would be good thereafter. I point this out because it isn't until late adolescence, early 20s, that one can take charge of their own life and make that kind of a decision and act on it. I was lucky. I was going to college at a time where there were dormitories and adults that were in those dorms that sort of checked to make sure you were okay. I had advantages there. So I used the transition to adulthood in a very helpful way. That's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is you're never home free. I learned a lot, and I learned a lot about my power to control my own life. But of course, it isn't full control, it's only influence. Bad things kept happening. Not all the time, but some very bad things happened. And when in my 50s, something really awful happened in my life that had happened 30 or 40 years before. This is my second point. I looked at my husband and I said, the next year or so are going to be just terrible. Please, whatever I do, stay with me, put some limits around me. Don't let me completely fall to pieces, but trust that no matter what I say or what I do, I will get back together. I will be okay again. Just stay and wait while I go through this awful thing that I'm going to go through. The point is, I had been through enough and had taken enough charge of how it happened that I was resilient. I didn't know how I was going to solve this next problem, but I knew I would. And a problem is only a problem if you don't know how to solve it. If you do know how to solve it, doesn't matter what it is, it's not a problem. So by definition, for it to be a problem, I had to have no idea what the solution would look like. and I had enough experience to know the process was going to be terrible. At the same time, I had succeeded enough times with enough things, different problems, that I felt confident I would make it. And that is what I think resilience is. It's learning experience by experience that you almost certainly can keep learning and solve this next problem. That would be what I would say I've taken from my experience. Make a few proper decisions at the right moment in life, and then trust that you'll be able to make a few more.
I think in your work in the DMM, that's a gift that you have given in terms of helping people to navigate those problems.
I think, I can't know, but I began working with very poor people, both white and black, living in the hollows of Virginia, living in the inner city ghettos. I'm not like that at all. Listen to me talk. My grammar, my presentation, it was never worse than this. It was always like this. There's nothing that would allow me to walk into those homes and be at home and be accepted unless somehow I conveyed an empathy for the kind of experiences that they had, that somehow I conveyed that I understood suffering and I didn't condemn or brush off people who had the kinds of experiences they had. I don't have any other explanation for how I was successful at something that everything about my presentation would say, I'm not like you. But everything about my interaction would say, I have experienced things like what you have experienced.
Looking back, what would you say have been your key experiences that enabled you to do that?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's luck. How come I got a teaching job in a black school at the end of segregation? How come I got to work with mothers groups before there was such a thing as parent-infant interaction? I was there right at the beginning of infant studies. It has to do with when I was born, and I felt like I have had the good fortune to be on the cusp of emerging ideas. I'm a developmental psychopathologist because I was there at the moment when the term was coined. Good luck played a big part in it. And I had the good fortune to live where Mary Ainsworth taught. And through that, I got to know Bowlby. And because Mary Ainsworth was very important, I got to know a number of important people as a graduate student. I had a superior education, not because of me, but because I was very lucky. Well, and they accepted me, so it is a little bit because of me. But
what were your first impressions of attachment theory and the work that Mary Ainsworth was doing?
Well, I had no idea what they were. I was in training as a family therapist, and I asked the principal faculty member to write me a recommendation to be a child protection worker. And he looked at me and he said, Pat, I will, but you should not be doing child protection. You need a PhD. And I said, oh, I don't think I could ever get a PhD. And he said, well, what if I guarantee that you will get in? Then will you apply? And I said, well, if you can do that, okay. I said, fine, call up Mary Ainsworth, tell her that you'd like to take her course. So I called up this person named Mary Ainsworth. I had no idea who she was, just doing what this family therapy professor told me to do. And I said, Dr. Ainsworth, I'd like to be able to take your course. I think I will be coming as a graduate student, but right now I'd just like to take your course. What is it about? And there was this dead silence. You don't ask Dr. M.D.S. Ainsworth what she teaches. I didn't even know the word attachment. I had been teaching parent groups, leading parent groups for 3 years. And I was working in attachment and I was promoting attachment, but I'd never heard the word. I knew about Brazelton, I knew about Dan Stern, but didn't know a word about Mary Ainsworth or John Bolton. So we had this awkward moment when we discovered that ignorant Pat really understood the field of attachment very well, but not under that term. My first experience was, people as old as you teach? She was younger than I am now. Yeah.
At that time, was Mary Ainsworth as influential within the field as she came to be?
I became her student in the year that she was elected president of the Society for Research in Child Development. So in developmental psychology, this is the most important position there is. It was also the year when her book came out, Patterns of Attachment, 1978. That's the year I'm starting graduate school. I've already worked for 10 years, but now I'm coming back to school. And I was very lucky that I was used to being independent, teaching classrooms, running parent groups, because Mary was horribly busy. She was the head of SRCD. She was in research collaboratives all over the United States and internationally. She was a very distant figure that I often felt I was running behind her down the halls. Mary, do you have a minute, Mary?
My next question to ask you as you were speaking about her was, what was it like to work with her? Can you say a bit more?
Well, it was a bit like tugging on her sleeve to say, remember me? I'm one of your students, because she was very busy and very important. And the world thought she was very available and so nice. And didn't I love Mary Ainsworth? Well, yes, I did, but not because she was available, not because she went around being nicey-nicey. She was to the general public, but up close, you had to work much harder to find time with her. And even then, you knew that it was a narrow slot of time and she was checking her watch because the next thing would happen soon. She was incredibly useful. When I would ask her to do something, she was very helpful. But if I didn't ask her, she didn't think. She wasn't the sort of person who had time to think, what do my students need? How can I mentor them forward? You really had to tug at her sleeve if you were in the inner circle. A stranger, well, strangers got different treatment, but strangers are brief. They come and go. Graduate students in the United States, it's a mentoring process. There were only 2 or 3 of us. You come to know your mentoring professor very well. You start to spend Christmases with them and that sort of thing. It's that kind of close relationship. And she protected the boundaries quite well.
Yeah. I know you have written about this. I wondered if you could share what you learned from Mary Ainsworth.
To work very, very hard, often by myself, to observe and observe and observe. She was such an observer, and she wrote it all down in this teeny tiny precise handwriting. And beyond all of that, to look at the mistakes, the errors in the data, after you had done all the observing, done all the coding, written down all the exceptions, and now you run the data, she wanted to look at, and I became fascinated by, the cases that didn't fit the hypothesis. Yes, of course, my hypotheses always worked, and I got high P levels, and that was very fine, and I was going to be able to publish. uninteresting. What was interesting were the three cases that did fit the hypothesis. What were the individual differences that set these three cases aside? It might have been code or error, and in that case, it's not interesting. Of course, there's code or error, so what? But what if it is not code or error, and everyone agrees, that would be Mary, me, and anyone else who wanted to ask, that these cases didn't have the predicted classifications? How did we explain that? And I think I have built the DMM on the cases that didn't fit the model that I tested. And the outcome was a more elaborate model that included a wider variation of what humans could be like. And then you test that, and you've still left somebody out, and you need a model that fits those people too. It's been a constant tension between having a model that included enough individual differences that everybody fits somewhere, but not as many individual differences as there are humans, because every human is unique. How much differentiation could I ask a coder to learn? And how much differentiation could a therapist manage and find useful to customizing the therapy to that individual person?
I feel like you struck the perfect balance with that, in you and Andrea Lundini's book, Assessing Adult Attachment, that does that perfectly. But before we get...
A lot of people would say, in fact, almost everybody in the ABC+D model would say, Pat's got 22 categories. How can we use a model like that? And I would answer, but there are 7 billion people. That's a very tight model into which you would shove everybody. Okay, add some psychological trauma, a little bit of loss, add a few modifiers like depression and reorganization, throw in some ENAs. Maybe we've got 100 different groups. For 7 billion people? Anyway.
What was your first original contribution to attachment theory?
I think it was finding the positive aspects of abusing and neglecting mothers and discovering that the odd symptomatic behavior, disorganized, we would later call it, behavior of their children was adaptive in their context. Finding the strengths of the mothers, finding the strengths of the children.
I see that as essentially the core of what the DMM became. It's such a beautiful and complex integration of different theories. When did it become an entity in itself?
The process, what can I say? 2 points stand out to me. In 1993, might have been 2, but it's published in 94, I wrote a paper peering into the black box, the development of the self. And at that point, I already had AC, I had C34 and A34, and now I was proposing C56, and I knew that that model was now enough different from what Mary Main was doing with disorganization. And you need to know, we knew each other, we looked at the same videotapes, and she would say, I see disorganization, I would say C4. I knew when I was adding C56 that this was going to force a decision point in attachment theory, that we couldn't call these methods the same anymore. So I asked Mary Ainsworth, who was then living in a retirement home, to please read this one long last paper, because I was going in my own direction. And if she thought it the wrong direction or an unwise thing to do, it wasn't published yet, please tell me. I got her blessing to go forward with this new model. And with that, no one from the ABC+D crowd ever spoke to me again. People that I was used to going to dinner with, people that I shared hotel rooms with at conferences, the people I considered my professional friends, and some of them my academic siblings, I ceased to exist for them. So that was certainly one point that marked the DMM as being different from what preceded it. It was an evolution, but if you're going to cut things, that would be the point. It still wasn't called dynamic maturational model of attachment and adaptation. That name came slowly in pieces. It wasn't the DMM until Steve Farnfield gave it that acronym, and it's been the DMM ever since Steve called it the DMM.
What was it like for you? See, when you identify new strategies, can you remember what that felt like for you?
Oh, there were these aha moments when it would come together, and I would see not only how to understand this child's behavior, but it was like this group of 10 children, and I understood it. I could see how this behavior functioned. It was an exciting aha moment, and also a relief. Kind of, all right, that part of the world is now sorted out. I have that much understanding. I'll take you back to me being a 16-year-old saying I didn't have the social understanding that my peers did. Here's another corner of what everybody else is doing that I now have a way to think about.
Yeah. I can remember when I was learning the adult attachment interview, I would have these little moments of just euphoria when I would learn about a different type of transformation of information. And I'm just imagining what that must have been like to be the one actually identifying it for the first time.
I mean, I wasn't doing anything great. I was just doing the next day's work. But it was a wonderful feeling that something had come together, that I'd captured that idea. It might take years to refine it, but there was an inner sense, this is right. I know this, I recognize this thing.
Yeah. What were the next key milestones in the development of the DMM?
Oh, see, you're saying that from the fact that there is a DMM. When you're looking forward, you're not looking at it that way. I wanted to publish 30 papers. I thought I would be there when I had 30 publications. And when I applied for my first job, I had only 5, so I had a ways to go. Before I left University of Miami, I did have my 30, and I had a year when there were 5 publications in 1 year, and none of them were sent back for rewrites. They were accepted as written, and that was a major milestone for me. Oh boy, was that it. I set 100 papers as the next milestone, thinking that that was really a lot. But of course, as we moved to computers, it became possible to publish many more papers than one could publish when one only had typewriters and punch cards for the computer, which was in the basement of a building. So there were those kinds of things. I had models that were unbalanced for a long time. There was no A7-8, and I knew something belonged there. I had C7-8. It was uncomfortable. I knew I didn't have something. So when the model came together, that felt good. When Andrea and I found 2 more transformations of information, we had 5, which I had argued in 1997, a big publication year, that was the complete reality. I had them all logically, there couldn't be more. And then we go to write assessing adult attachment with our 5 transformations of information. We realized we couldn't explain some of the transcripts we wanted to use as examples. And so we found denied information and delusional information. That was a wow, exciting moment. We have one now. We have a paper that's been invited. It's not been accepted yet, but it's been invited. We've finished it, in which we are quickly describing the information processing that produces the strategies. Fine, that's old. And then we say, if you accept all of this, then service systems, as we have them now, don't function. And we have 5 major recommendations for revising mental health, child protection, and criminality service systems. And so that is that feeling. We sent this paper out to a couple of people on the way, and they said, well, yeah, but your recommendations, they're ho-hum, yeah, of course. Go back, work on it harder. We've now sent it out to those people, and they're happy. Yes, you got the package together. So we're very excited. We hope this paper is overlinked. We hope it will be accepted as it stands. We hope that it will be worth the extra 2,000 words. So there's a sense we now know what we'd like to change in the treatment system. And that's a very nice thing to think, not easy to pull off, but still, you have to know where you're going to have much hope of getting there.
I'm curious to read it. How did you meet Andrea Lundini?
He needed to do a thesis for his psychiatry medical degree, and he was doing it on maltreated children, and he asked his professor, should I invite Mary Main or should I invite Pat Crittenden? And he said, Pat Crittenden, of course. So I was invited to Italy, and he was my translator. He guided me everywhere. In a foreign culture where I didn't speak the language and learned to love the food, Italian food, not American Italian food, or certainly not British Italian food. He took care of me, and he still does. He's 20 years my junior, and yet his role in supporting me, in critiquing things I do, in adding ideas, because his strength is treatment, mine is developmental psychology. We have a marriage of compatible but different ideas, and he's there. I can write in the middle of the night and say, oh my God, I think that tomorrow. And he's there 6 hours ahead of me, going, okay, we'll do this. It'll be fine. His tomorrow comes before my tomorrow, and it works.
What were his key contributions to the DMM?
Primarily in getting rid of my flaky ideas. There are a whole lot of ideas you don't see that he said, come on, Pat, you don't really mean that, do you? Well, no, you're right, I don't. There was that. There is winnowing out that which shouldn't remain, and which I can't remember what it is, so don't ask for an example. And then adding his own ideas and expertise about treatment, but also letting me watch the 30 years that I've known him, watch how he delivered treatment, how he developed as a therapist, and begin to see those things that you can't see for yourself, someone outside of you sees. But he has contributed massively to the way we think about DMM integrative treatment.
And I know that you talked about having gone to Italy. Where else have you taken the DMM?
Well, the last time I got a passport, I had to identify every country that I'd been to. At that time, it was 35. I have probably taught the DMM at length in 20 of those countries, meaning multiple visits, each of a few weeks. And of course, people that I know then that cease to be foreign people, they just become people that I know. Yeah, so more than 35.
Why is it important to you that the DMM reaches so many different places?
We Western, particularly Northern Hemisphere democracies, we're just a tiny slice of people, a very small proportion of the 7 billion of us. And we are the safest, richest of the people in that 7 billion. We're not typical at all. We're a very unusual group of people. And I wanted a theory about human adaptation. You simply can't get it from rich and safe countries. You can find poor and unhappy people, but you really need to go to cultures that have been substantially endangered to build the model of how people adapt to very strong dangers and very long-term dangers, deceptive dangers. We, since World War II, we don't have the equivalent of that on any large scale. If you want a theory of humans, you have to go out and look at humans.
And from doing so, this has led to there being an international community of DMMers.
It has, and it began as a wheel with spokes. Me in the middle, and I'd fly there, and me back home, and fly there, and back home, and fly there. But somewhere, probably in the late 90s, I began to ask people to come together in one place. And I remember, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I remember thinking, do you want to bring all your separate little connections together? Because they're going to start talking together, and you won't be the middle of the wheel anymore. And it seemed to me that the growth of the ideas depended upon our knowing each other and sharing those ideas. So EASA shows up in 2007. Sunderland is our base. We had already had some trainers meetings, again, in interesting places. We only go to interesting places. So a little island off the coast of Norway, Holmen. And now we know if you go to an island, ask how big it is. Can you get away from the other people if you want a moment alone? In Holmen, you cannot. And you can't have a discrete relationship with someone else because everybody's looking out their windows at you having this indiscreet relationship. We ask questions like that. We ask whether there's water in the swimming pool when we go off season to Sicily and we get there too early. We've been all over the world, many, many different places, learning how people live in those places, what they eat, finding ourselves welcomed in places we've never been. This is the only year, 2020, but also now 21, when we haven't traveled to be together. It's very strange.
Feels like it's very timely for us having the opening of the DMM community online.
It's so timely, and thank heavens we had the technology where it was. If this had happened 10 years earlier, we couldn't have solved it in this manner. So the technology and the virus came together nicely.
What do you want for the DMM over the next 5, 10, 20 years?
I want it to become mainstream. to not be considered a little offshoot that isn't quite attachment. I'd like it to be mainstream attachment. I think it is building on the individual differences that Ainsworth had in mind. And I think a model of 4 things doesn't do that. I think it is building on Bowlby's understanding of the effects of danger and the need to integrate theories. We've integrated more theories and we've added reproduction. I think we are doing what Bowlby and Ainsworth set out to do, and we're bringing it to treatment. Robbie Dushinsky has a recently published book in which he said, and I agree with him, therefore I report it, that the huge number of academicians writing about attachment don't have anything to say to those who do treatment. And he listed only 4 people that he thought had something to offer in the field of treatment. Needless to say, the DMM was one. And the DMM was the only complete model, as opposed to going into early parent-infant relationships and building that out. The DMM is lifespan. It's cross-cultural. It's cross-disciplinary. It's a big model addressing all the different ways that people can suffer and all the hope we have for how that can be changed.
One of the things that I would really like for the DMM community is for it to build upon the existing science and apply the DMM to different domains. I wonder if there's any areas that you think that the DMM shows real promise in, but hasn't yet been researched.
There's nothing that has no research. I think I have another idea that I want to say, and it's making it hard for me to answer your question. I'm going to go with the idea I want to talk about. Will you forgive me? Through blind good luck, I trained in English literature. I had some training and became a teacher. I got a degree in special education. I functioned as a social worker, and I was trained in old behavioral therapy, 1960s, and family therapy. So I am cross-trained, and you would think the English literature had nothing to do with it. But if you want to code the AAI, you need to know something about connotative language. It matters how you say what you say. That cross-disciplinary training means that I know something about research. I know something about walking into the homes of troubled families and sitting there for an hour with the cockroaches and the spilled juice from the baby and the crying. I know something about that. I think having been cross-trained or transdisciplinary training has been an extremely important contribution to what I am able to add. And one of the things that we put in our list of suggested changes was that people out of all disciplines in the helping professions begin together with an initial basic course on the basic principles of helping people. And if you were going to be a psychiatrist or you were going to be a neurologist and read brain images, or you were going to be a clinical social worker or an occupational therapist or a forensic psychologist or a social worker or whatever, you would all be in the same class of basic fundamental ideas. Everybody would spend some time in the actual homes of these people. Everybody would see what the neurological images looked like. everybody would have their own AAI given to them and discussed with them. They would all get a sampling of what all their peers would be doing, coming with the basic principles of how do we help people. And I suspect that my belief that we don't need multidisciplinary committees as much as we need transdisciplinary people with specializations comes out of that experience of mine. So I told you what I'm all excited about today. What did you ask me about?
I asked what areas of research you would like to prioritize focusing on.
I think a lot needs to be done about somatic functioning, bodily organs, the immune system. Kasia Kozlowska has opened that doorway. Others have done so. I've done before her. She's not alone. It's something we definitely need more work on. I think that assessment should be a specialization. I don't think it should be an add-on for a therapist. And as a specialization, it should then have research on the most efficient ways to do assessments. I think that our brain imaging is clunky. I think that our DMM assessments are clunky. They're clunky because they require so much detail that very few people can do it well. Both brain imaging and the DMM assessments are pattern recognition tasks. And if we could find, obviously through research, more efficient ways to get this done, that would be very helpful. So I'd like to see some good assessment research. I do not want to see a new set of self-reports. We know what they can tell us. It isn't enough. We need the things that the inexplicit brain imaging, DMM assessments, other such things can provide. But maybe a specialty in assessment research.
What message do you have for early career practitioners?
Put your nose to the grindstone, do the empirical work, dream if you want about the lofty things, but get the empirical work out. Get the experience of working with multiple people with different kinds of problems. Just get that daily experience under your belt. Dream big, but do the basic work first. Get that done.
What brings you most wonder when you think about the DMM?
What brings me the most wonder? The glory of how many different ways there are to solve life's problems. So many different ways to do it right. I don't want a model that outlines each of them, but every time I listen carefully to an AAI, and I put that AAI with the assessments of the spouse and the children, and I see the family as a whole, I am amazed at the ingenuity of humans, our ability to withstand threats you wouldn't have thought we could withstand. I'm always hopeful. That's the wonder. The more work I do, the more hopeful I am that we can solve the problems we're facing. We're up to it.
For anyone who's listening who hasn't read Pat and Andrea's book, Assessing Adult Attachment, I would strongly recommend that you do, because for what Pat was just describing there, I think that it just brings so much nuance and clinical wisdom, and it's just so stimulating.
Thank you, but if you like storytelling, Assessing Adult Attachment won't do it for you. It doesn't tell the stories. If you want the stories, if you like the little narratives, go to Raising Parents or go to Attachment and Family Therapy. They both have the anecdotes, the narratives, the stories of real lives.
I've got some closing curiosities, and I just wonder if you could touch on these. So,
if you had the chance to see
Bowlby and Ainsworth, and you could tell them something about what you've achieved with the DMM,
what would you say?
What would I tell Bowlby? You set a model that I'm so happy to have the chance to emulate by integrating theories. Bowlby integrated 3 or 4 major theories, giving me the opportunity to copy that model and not identify or to disagree with in what other people do, but all the strengths of all the other thinkers that have preceded me, to have the chance to try to pull it together. Ainsworth, I would say, you were hunting for individual differences, and you told me to go ahead and do it. And I'm still doing it. And I'm doing it at other ages, which is what you said should come next. And I'm still hunting at older ages for the individual differences. And then back to Bowlby. Bowlby was a therapist. He wanted a theory that would change therapy. And I guess I would say, I think we're almost ready to do that.
Okay, well, I think that's a nice place for us to bring it to a close then. So I just want to thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely speaking with you.
It's been fun to do this. And I hope in the not too distant future, some of us will be able to be together in person again.
Me too.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Alex, whom I cannot see, for setting up the DMM community. They've been working for months on this, more than 6 of them, to set this up. Big job. I hope we'll all find you here frequently, chatting with each other. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Pat.